I'm here tonight to deliver a message of unity and strength, and it is a message deeply delivered from my heart.
That was President Trump last night at his presidential address, a joint session of Congress. Karen Travers, ABC News White House correspondent, good morning.
Good morning. This was a speech that was certainly much more action-oriented than ones we've seen before from President Trump. More positive, a different tone. He was speaking to the audience in front of him and the audience tuning in at home, but the agenda was still the same. He's not backing away from a pretty harsh agenda that he pursued on the campaign trail, but last night it was packaged a little differently.
Yeah, no, everyone's saying that the tone, it sounded more presidential. He was more presidential. He didn't lash out. There's no sort of one-hit wonders, no lines that he called out anybody. And referencing the soldier's wife was a stirring moment as well. But it ended a day, Karen Travers, in which it sounded like coming out of your little office there at the White House, they were all over the place in terms of changing immigration reform, going against the generals. This travel ban was back on, back off again. So it seemed like it was a very crazy day, but it ended normally, I guess.
It did. It ended with the president really sticking to script. We had an advance copy of the speech. It was in the teleprompter, and he really didn't deviate from that. And that was something people were looking for heading in. Would he go on a couple riffs? Would he talk about the fake news? He didn't. And I think that's a recognition that, this is not a speech to a conservative conference. This is a speech to the entire country, half of which did not support you in the election. There are record disapproval ratings right now. So perhaps this was the president more of a sobering reminder that he does need to reach out. He does need to speak differently when he is addressing the entire nation and giving a speech to all Americans. That said, if you like Donald Trump, you like that speech. But, there was some grumbling, which I thought was interesting from some of our focus groups, that he sounded too much like a politician, and that's not why they elected him. He sounded like everybody else who goes to the House chamber and does that. If you don't like Donald Trump, there probably wasn't anything in that speech last night to change your mind. Words aren't going to do it, but maybe down the road, results could.
What was the story, sort of like a trial balloon, that he was looking for a compromise on immigration, and then nothing last night in the speech?
This was interesting in this lunch yesterday with news anchors. I don't even know if it would be considered a trial balloon. I mean, it might be genuine that this is something the president wants to do. He did say last night he believes that real and positive immigration reform is possible. Well, if you look at the track record of Congress over the last decade or plus, that's really unlikely. I mean, it's been very difficult to do that. And especially to hear Donald Trump say that, who campaigned as such a hardliner on immigration, suggesting at this lunch yesterday that maybe he would consider legal status for some undocumented immigrants. That didn't come up last night in detail in the speech, but we might be looking at a possible path to citizenship for the dreamers, those kids who were brought here illegally as children. The president has certainly had a softening rhetoric on that in recent weeks, and maybe that's the area where he says he could compromise and Democrats could get on board for a bigger plan.
Karen Travers, it was long on platitudes, short on specifics. When is the White House saying they're going to start rolling out some of the facts on all this stuff?
Well, that's the big question. The president had a very sizable to-do list last night, but he didn't give any details on what he would do on trade deals, tax cuts, health care, the border wall. It was just a lot of, here's what I want to do. Okay, well, Congress go and do it. I think especially on health care, that to me was a huge headline last night. There's a big rebellion going on Capitol Hill right now. Conservatives do not like this plan that the Republican leadership has come up with that would include tax credits for people to help them pay for health insurance. Last night, president included that in one of his principles for Congress, so essentially saying he's on board with what Speaker Ryan is doing, sending a bit of a warning to the conservatives that they need to get on board too.
I couldn't help.
That's going to be tough.
Karen Travers, I couldn't help but notice Speaker Paul Ryan in the background. It looked like Christmas morning for Speaker Ryan.
It.
I mean, he could have written that speech.
He really could have. That whole section on health care was perfect. That's exactly what he wanted to hear from the president. And the email that went out from his office at the end of the speech called it a home run. And even Paul Ryan's spokesperson during the speech, during that health care part, sent out an email to reporters and said, there it is. Like, that's what they were looking for. That was a strong message to conservatives. Now, here's where it gets tricky. You could still pass something in the House, even with a conservative rebellion, if you could get some Democrats Democrats on board, but the Senate's going to be tough. 3 Republican senators yesterday came out and said only a full repeal of the Affordable Care Act is acceptable to them, not Obamacare light. That is not what the president was indicating last night.
Also, are Republicans now for paid family leave? That's kind of a big story that's sort of being glossed over.
A big story and a big price tag. And again, something that the president has talked sort of kind of how he would pay for it, but not really put the numbers to paper of how this would actually get done. I mean, in theory, the concept is something people could get behind, but it is a very, very big bill. And again, I don't see how Republicans would do that.
Right, yeah. Paid family leave is a great idea, just as long as you're not the person paying the person not to work.
Right.
Karen Travers, ABC News, White House correspondent. Karen, thanks for getting up early for us.
Thank you.
627, big